Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so.
Goblins.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Lily, and Marshall's behind the camera today. There's his hand.
So Lily, what kind of video are we making today, and why did you want to make this video?
So, if you guys have read the title of this video, you probably have an idea of what it's about. Basically, I joined a cult my sophomore year of college. I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I didn't know it was a cult. Definitely know it's a cult now. And I don't know, I thought it would be an interesting story, and I kind of wanted to spread awareness about it, because they don't seem like a cult when you first join them, and they, in particular, prey on young individuals in college that are kind of alone and maybe a little bit lost and feel like they need a support group, because that's what they tout themselves as. So, that's why I wanted to make this.
Okay, let's get into it. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can just answer them how you feel. So, what is the International Church of Christ, in your knowledge, your knowledge?
This is the title of the cult. They go by a lot of names. The one that I joined they're worldwide, at least in the U.S., nationwide, I guess you could say. The one I went to specifically was called the Church of Angels. I think they were part of like the LA County. So this was in Southern California when I joined it. And basically, they are a church. You go to Sunday services. Their services are probably about like 3 hours long, which is really long for a Christian service.
That's long for a Catholic Easter Mass.
Yeah.
That's long. 3 hours is really long.
It was basically, the first hour was worship and a testimony of somebody, and then there was like a break, and then there was another hour of the actual like message of the day, and then there would be a small sort of like Bible study group, and then after the service they would go across the street to Baker's and do another Bible study, but you split in by gender. The girls went with the girls and the boys went with the boys, and you did your Bible study groups. So it seemed like a church when you first joined. It just seems like a very strange, it was very small, it felt very like family-like. It was mostly college students in it, so it just kind of felt like a very small church that just kind of did things a little bit differently. But they take up all of your time. There are Bible studies basically every day. There are constant like events that they go to. They'll have like dances for the younger members of the church, and the biggest thing is they want to baptize you, because they believe you are not a true disciple of Christ unless you have been baptized by their church. So that is their goal. Once they start doing the Bible studies with you, they take you through this whole process. I think it's like 10 or so sessions of Bible study, and then they baptize you, and you are a member of their church and a true disciple.
You want to hear something funny? When you said they have an hour of worship, it sounded to me like you said an hour of worship. And I was like,
oh yeah, we
it's
get
like
on
they
a
have
battle. We get
you
on a
have
battleship.
mock battle.
Yeah.
At sea.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That would be cool. That would be a cult I would be interested in joining.
Yeah, that'd be actually pretty fun. Do some reenactment.
Yeah.
But no, this was singing your praise to Jesus.
Quick question. So, like, you said it was mostly college students. Mm-hmm. How old was the pastor?
The pastor was probably in his mid-30s.
Wow, so even he was pretty young.
Yeah, he was pretty young. He had a wife, and I think they had 2 young children. There were, aside from the pastor and his wife, there were no, like, married couples. I think there was maybe one other married couple in the church. There was an older member of the church who I think he was, like, in his mid-50s, but most of the church was college students, probably ranging in age from like 18 to 24 was probably like the average age range. I think I was 19 when this happened. So yeah, it was mostly, and there was no children. Aside from the pastor's children, there was no kids.
Mm-hmm. Which is pretty strange in a church. Churches, I mean, anyone who's spending time in a church, you're going to hear babies crying and kids
Yeah.
doing things they're not supposed to. Moms are constantly taking them out back to beat the crap out of them.
There was no families.
Yeah,
I think
weird.
there was maybe one family and they had like a teenage son, but they were like a younger-ish couple.
Yeah, so very young, which, when I think of a cult, I don't think young. Is
No?
that weird? I don't know. I think people in their like 40s.
I guess that makes sense, but I think this one in particular, college students are just particularly susceptible to it. From what I've read, I've done a bit of research on them since I left, and from what I've read, it was mostly college students that came into it and then left because they realized just how vile these people can be. So I think college students are very vulnerable because often they're alone, they don't have much of a support group, and they feel like they're entering into a family when they come there.
So let's get a little more into the details. Now that you've given us an overview of what the ICC is. Is that what the proper sort of
That's what people call it.
Acronym is?
They themselves don't call it the ICC. They called it the City of Angels Church of Christ.
Gotcha. So CACC.
Yeah.
CACOC.
Kayak.
Anyway, why did you join? Why join in the first place?
So at the time, my current boyfriend and I were both Christian. I was kind of not fully Christian, but I went to church with him because I know it made him happy, and I was kind of starting to believe because I had been going to church for like 2 or so years by then. We went to a mega church in Southern California called Harvest. You may have heard of them before. I am not a particular big fan of them, but that's the one his family had been going to his entire life. And he was approached by a student. He went to a community college at the time. He was approached by a student that asked, "Hey, do you want to go to a Bible study?" And they just kind of approached him like that, and he was like, I haven't been to a Bible study in a long time. That could be interesting. I think I might go. So he went with them. They sat him down. They did a Bible study, and we'll get into what their Bible studies look like in a bit. And he really liked the guy. They kind of got along really well. And so after the Bible study, the guy invited him to his church that Sunday, and he was like, yeah, I don't see why not. And he messaged me and said, hey, do you want to check out this new church with me? And I figured, why not? It was later in the day than our normal church service, so it gave me a chance to sleep in, so I was all for it. So we went to them, and it was a lot different than Harvest. Harvest is kind of very impersonal. It's huge. They've got these big screens up. You're like miles away from the pastor. I never even spoken directly to the pastor. Here, the first thing that happened was the pastor shook my hand and gave me a hug, and we met all of the congregation. It was very small, probably about like 35 people at most, and it just felt very wholesome, and I felt like I could connect with these people. It's what I was looking for in a church, so I felt really good about them. They didn't do like traditional Christian pop worship songs, which is what Harvest did. They did kind of more traditional songs, and I kind of liked that feeling of it. And afterwards, a couple of the girls that I had met who turned out to go to the same college as me invited me to a Bible study. We went across the street to the Bakers and sat down, and my boyfriend went off with his friend, and I went with them. I was a little bit weirded out by that at first, because I thought we were going to do it all together as one big group, but I kind of got over it. And then they sat me down, and we did a Bible study. I had never been to a Bible study before, so I wasn't sure what to expect, so the way they did it just kind of felt normal. And I exchanged numbers with the girl. She kind of became my sponsor. I probably still have her number, honestly. I don't... Actually, no, I blocked her, but I might have one of their numbers still. So, yeah, it just felt... I felt like I had a friend. I always had a really hard time making friends in college, so this felt nice and special. And she would, like, check up on me. We would get lunch together at school, and we would, like, meet on campus to do the Bible studies. So it just felt nice to have a sort of connection with someone.
Do you think you were vulnerable in that time of your life?
I think so. My sophomore year of college was pretty rough. Not as rough as my junior year, or the beginning of my junior year, but I was taking a lot of very difficult classes. I was probably depressed. I was very anxious. I was just kind of looking for something to cling to at that time.
So, let's talk a little bit about, I want to know, did you ever suspect it was a cult? And more specifically, maybe we can talk a little bit about that Bible study, because I have a feeling that might illuminate what you suspected, if you suspected it. Of course, and by this I mean, did you suspect it before you left and finally realized what it was?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, I think there were little things where I was like, oh, that's a little weird, but I think I kind of brushed them off, just as it being a small church. Maybe that's just how they do things here. I don't know if I ever fully suspected that they were a cult until the very end. I was probably with them for a total of 2.5 months, so I wasn't in it for that long, but I think any time I had, like, doubts, or I think the one thing that made me wonder is during one of the Bible studies, the girl that was, like, my mentor said, people are gonna say that this is a cult and that you need to get away from us and that we're bad people. And she gave me, like, a list of websites, and she's like, go to these websites and it'll prove to you that we're not a cult. And I was like, you have to say you're not a cult. That's a little suspicious. But I kind of brushed it off. They make it feel like they are the only ones that believe you and that you can trust, and you feel like they're your only support system, so it makes it hard to kind of doubt them at all.
Yeah. So what were these Bible studies like exactly? Going a little bit there.
So I actually found online the notes that they use. I'll put them in a link below in case you're curious of what they look like. From what I had never been to a Bible study before, but from what I know, it's a group of people, and it's kind of like a book club. You read a passage, you discuss it, you kind of take notes of anything that stands out to you, write down any passages that kind of are meaningful to you. You were Catholic for a while. Did you ever do Bible studies? Is that kind of how it is?
So I never did an extracurricular Bible study, but we actually at our Catholic school had a theology course, right? All Catholic schools have one. And that was kind of like a Bible study. We spent most of our time studying passages of the Bible, sometimes other stuff, but almost all passages of the Bible. And yeah, it's like you said, it's a lot. It feels a lot like a book club, but a really boring one, where you can't pick the book and you go over the same book over and over again. And
but yeah, that's what I thought a Bible study would be like. But I didn't take my own notes. I had, like, a notebook ready and everything, and I had, like, highlighters ready to take really good notes, but they took the notes for me. It was always a group of, there was myself, and then there was always 3 other girls in it. One of them led the session, one of them was there to just kind of be there and, have more of a conversation, and the other girl took the notes. And I thought that was a little bit weird, but I was like, okay, it gives me more of a... They explained it, they want me to focus more on the message rather than taking notes and having to worry about scribbling everything down and getting everything down.
Now, this is something that struck me as odd the other day when we were reviewing this story. The idea of... I get that. I personally have trouble paying attention to a lecture while I'm also taking diligent notes, so I often... will not. Like, if I'm listening to a really interesting lecture, sometimes I don't take a single note. And if I'm listening to a boring lecture, I often take notes because I'm just like, whatever. But I find it strange that they just didn't print out notes for you. Like, why have another person there writing the notes down? Why not just print it out? It seems... It's
because they want to have that level of control over you.
But it seems like they could have that same control by printing it out.
Yeah, I don't quite get it.
I almost feel like it's trying to, like, make you feel like they're working really hard to, like, help you.
That could be
or something, you know, because you got this goddamn personal note taker with you. It's so strange. And you said that in this situation, it was a leader, a note taker, and then a discusser.
Yeah.
So this is a very strange setup for a Bible study, because usually Bible studies are like, often they don't even have leaders, especially if they're just, like, self-organized, you know, like if it's a college Bible group. I'm pretty sure they don't often have, like, strong leadership.
After I left them, I was still Christian, and there was my college has just, like, a ton of religious groups on campus, despite being, like, a public college. So I'd been, if you're sitting out in the quad, there's probably about like an 85% chance that somebody's going to approach you and ask if you want to come to their meeting or their Bible study. And I had gone to another one, and it was much different. It was a big group of people. We were eating our lunch, and we basically, the club leader, just to kind of keep some organization in it, because we're a bunch of college students, and we have the sort of mental capacity of a 5-year-old, he kind of chose a passage and said, let's talk about this. You guys showed interest in this sort of issue. Let's discuss it. And he basically just read a short passage, and then we talked about it. And that was nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what they all... I mean, it's generally a lot of people, and it'd be very weird to only have a Bible study between 2 people.
Yeah. It was very small. We, like, met in one of these private rooms in the library that you can rent out. And basically, the leader would read the passages. Sometimes they asked me to read a passage. They'd pause. We'd have a small discussion about it. The note taker would diligently take the notes. And I felt it was odd, but I didn't think anything of it until one of the sessions. I had noticed that the note taker had her phone out, and she was copying down notes from a document that they had online, which I found recently because I had suspected that they were using something. They weren't taking these notes from memory. They basically... It's called the First Disciples sort of like program that they take you through. There are...
I thought it was First Principles.
Oh, yeah, First Principles. There are 14 sessions. The last 4 go through Acts, the book of Acts, and it basically leads you through becoming a disciple. The first one I had with them, they basically talked about what is a disciple. You're not a true disciple if you haven't been baptized. You're not a true disciple if you don't believe in God. You're not a true disciple if you don't spread the word of God. They were really big on sort of evangelicism. There were times where we would walk around campus, ask people if they would want to come to our Bible study or come to our church meeting, and give them our numbers for them to contact us, because most of them didn't want to give us their numbers, which is understandable because these people are incessant and would constantly text you until you replied saying, yes, I will come to your Bible study.
You did this?
I never texted people, but I did give people my number to see if they wanted to reach out. I only did it once, and they called... It was the creepiest thing that my mentor said, we're going to go fishing. We call it fishing because we're fishing for disciples. And that was just the creepiest thing ever.
Catfishing.
Yeah. But yeah, so their Bible studies were just very strange. And the weirdest thing it's their 3rd session called discipleship, which they have this weird equation that they go through. They're like, if you have just 2 disciples and they go to church and then they bring 2 more disciples, then you're going to have 4 disciples, and each of those disciples brings a disciple, and it's going to keep multiplying, and by the end of like 10 years you're going to have the entire world is going to be a disciple, which was just this kind of big convoluted thing. But it was their justification for practicing evangelicalism and making more disciples.
Another question about the Bible study. It's kind of weird that I'm getting hung up on this setup of like, so there's another discusser. Mm-hmm. Was this other discusser in your boat? Like they were learning with you? Or had they already gone through? So they'd gone through the program.
Yeah, so
and they're just there to sort of...
Yeah, so the note taker was often my mentor. Sometimes they'd switch off and have somebody else. The leader was... they'd also sometimes switch off the leaders, but the leader was often somebody that had been with the church for a while and was often the mentor of my mentor, was the one that led it. And then the extra discusser was just somebody that had been in the church for a while and had gone through the discipleship program.
So they probably had dozens of these sessions going on during any given week.
Yeah, and there were multiple people that were at my college that I didn't even know until I had met all of them. But they went to my college, and there were tons of them there that I had met. And sometimes they didn't have an actual church. They met at a community center downtown, and sometimes they'd even meet on the college campus. They'd like rent out a room on the weekend.
So you got into this situation, and when you were discussing I'm really stuck on a Bible study. When you were discussing these passages, did you so let's say let's say you're discussing Jesus, turning his body into bread and his blood into wine, and you were like, oh, I wonder if, and you proposed some interesting idea. Did you ever like clash with what they wanted to teach you, and they were like, were they very aggressive about like shutting you down on the wrong interpretation, so to speak?
Yeah, they weren't aggressive. They did it in a way that made it feel like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I shouldn't doubt that. They had a very good way of forming their words to make it seem like what they were saying made sense, but they were very quick to shut that down.
Yeah.
I often brought up, because even when I was Christian, I often had contentions with, like, oh, stories like Noah's Ark or Adam and Eve, because I know it's debated. Some people that are religious, they say those are just stories they're like fables. They're meant to teach us a lesson, provide some kind of insight into what it means to be Christian. But some people believe that they are actual events that happened. And my boyfriend at the time and the International Church of Christ were the type of Christians that believed those were actual events that happened. Every single thing that is written down in the Bible is the truth, and it all happened. This is a history book, basically. So anytime I brought up, like, the story of Adam and Eve doesn't make sense, or I would bring up stuff like evolution, and my mentor at the time she was previously a biology major, but she had changed her major, so she had taken lots of the biology classes that I had taken, so she had a way of kind of forming it and say, like, well, they're not mutually exclusive, and which I do believe in a way, but the way she explained it is much different than how I do believe it. And she would basically kind of twist my views into what her views were so that I wouldn't doubt the Bible at all.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So they kind of poured honey over troubled waters whenever you doubted those things, but they tried to really shut you down immediately. Mm-hmm. Which I also would not be typical, I think, of a Bible study. But then again, I mean, I probably don't have super high opinions of regular Bible studies. Okay, so why do you believe it is a cult now? What was the thing that tipped you over, and how are you going to tell our audience that the skeptics in our audience who think, oh, this person just thinks all religion's a cult, what tipped you over, and what has made it certain in your mind that this is a culty institution?
So there are a lot of reasons why now I believe it is a cult. The thing that kind of pushed me over the edge, sort of towards the end, my boyfriend had been doing his Bible studies on his own, and we would kind of talk about them, but not very much, and we were still going to the church meetings on Sunday and stuff. But the thing that tipped me over the edge was, like, in the middle of the week, he called me crying because in his Bible study, they had gone through session 5, which is titled Light and Darkness. I hadn't gone to this one. I was on session 4 at the time, called The Coming of the Kingdom. And in Light and Darkness, they're talking about sin and the sins you've committed, and it's basically, they force you, in a way that doesn't seem like forcing, but they make you tell them all of the sins you've committed. And I'm assuming he told them stuff about our relationship that they weren't okay with. And they told him, we think you should break up with Lily so that you can walk your own separate paths. And he called me crying about this. And I said, okay, calm down. We don't have to break up. Let me talk to my mentor about it. And I did. And she kind of said the same thing. She was like, yeah, you guys seem great together, but I think you should walk your own paths and become disciples before you consider getting back into a relationship, because it's a lot easier to do on your own. And I was like, that seems whack. Wouldn't we be able to strengthen each other by walking the path together? So at this point, I was thinking, that's very controlling. I don't like this. At the time, I had already been seeing a lot of controlling things. They controlled dates. You were not allowed to go on a date on your own. And I had kind of found this out by talking to other people of the church, that you went on basically group dates, and they would have, like, dances that they would put on to try and get people to have supervised dates and stuff. And they would kind of choose who you should go on a date with. So I started doing more research. I found a bunch of testimonies of people that had left the church and that how they had, like, almost ruined their lives. So they were very controlling. They, another reason, after I had kind of done this research and started realizing that they were very controlling and had very cult-like tendencies, I was kind of thinking back on the things. Another thing that they were very adamant about was tithing, which most churches nowadays are. But you had to tithe every single week. They expected 10% of your paycheck. You had to tithe. They expected you to tithe extra at least once a month for their sort of missionary things. My mentor at the time was working at a gas station making minimum wage, and she was giving her entire paycheck to the church to pay for these missionary groups to go out and preach the word of God and help people in need and stuff. But most of what they were doing was preaching to them, not actually helping them. So that's another thing. They took up all of your time. There was the small Bible studies. There were every week. There were obviously the Sunday services every week. They would have dances once a month, or like sort of group gatherings, and then they would have these. They did specifically for the college students these sort of bigger Bible studies. It was kind of like a mini Sunday service that they would have several times a week, and you were expected to attend all of them. It basically took up every night I had, and when I said, I have to study for a test, I don't have time to go to this with you. I don't have a way to get there because my boyfriend is working and he can't drive me, and I don't have a license, and they'd offer to drive me, but I didn't want to go, or I didn't have the time to go, and they would keep pestering and trying to get me to go. And it just felt like they were trying to monopolize every little bit of time. So that is why I believe that they are a cult. And when I tried to leave, I messaged my mentor. I was like, hey, my boyfriend and I are feeling kind of uncomfortable. We think we're going to go back to our normal church. We think we're going to stop with the Bible studies. I'm sure you guys are really great, but we just don't want to participate in this anymore.
No, you weren't really sure that they're great.
Yeah, I just didn't want to hurt her feelings.
Yeah.
So I sent her that, and she, like, all of the girls I had been talking to immediately started messaging me and trying to convince me to come back, and I had to block them because they kept texting me trying to get me to come back to the church.
Yeah, so clearly they made these people very dedicated. I think, now this is just a hypothesis of mine, but I think that if you weren't there with him, your boyfriend, from what I understand of him, probably would still be in this cult to this day.
I think so.
I think he probably needed you to be like a voice of reason and be like, okay, well, obviously we're not going to do what they're telling us to do. Because I have a feeling he would just do everything they told him to do.
Yeah, he was
incredibly
fairly
devout.
impressional and very devout, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. He'd fallen for other things, right, in the past?
He may or may not have fallen victim to some multi-level marketing scams that I told him were multi-level marketing scams, and he didn't believe me and then lost quite a bit of money with them.
Yeah. So a gullible guy who is very devout seems like the perfect target. And who knows, if you hadn't have pulled him out, he might be recruiting for them to this day. He might be one of those aggressive people texting, over and over again.
Yeah. And at the time, I was also very impressionable, and I had a hard time standing up for myself, and I think if we hadn't been together and they had targeted me, and I was even a little bit religious at the time, which I was a little bit, I think I probably would have stayed with them as well.
And it makes sense that they wanted to split you up, because clearly the only thing that pulled you guys out was your relationship.
Yeah.
Although I think they overplayed their hand.
Definitely did.
I find all of this fascinating. So I think you were pretty lucky, all things considered.
Yeah.
You were only in this for 2.5 months.
Mm-hmm.
So you were in it really just enough to have a good story to tell people, but not enough to be permanently traumatized.
Yeah, I don't think they caused sort of any permanent damage. I didn't lose any money then because I never tithed, because I felt weird tithing to a church that I wasn't fully a part of, because I never got baptized with them or anything. I've never actually fully been baptized at all. So it just felt weird, especially because my paycheck at the time, and still is, was very limited, and what little money I had, I needed to pay for my books and food.
Yeah. So I think what I was going into was, so you got out, you didn't spend much money in it, you weren't in it for that long, and it didn't end up ending your relationship, right? Didn't really ruin your life at all. Mm-hmm. Had an interesting, I would say at worst, it's a very interesting story that you'll remember for a very long time. But I think that maybe one of the points of making this video, it sounds like, was to get the word out, because it sounds like some of the people in there, it really has, just at that church alone, regardless of these people online who have had testimonials, just at that church alone, it sounds like there were a lot of people who were giving, from what you've said, I think giving a lot of their disposable income on this tithing, which to me has always been a creepy word, but they've been giving an enormous amount of their disposable income. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think at the time, what my mentor was giving for it, they had these, I think it probably happened quarterly. They'd have 3 a year. They'd have these really big missionary trips where they'd send a couple members of the church somewhere in the world, generally Africa or some sort of third world country, where they could preach the gospel, and also they do stuff like build houses or something like that to do some sort of community service. But they needed money to send the people there because they weren't able to pay for it themselves. So there was like your weekly tithing, and then there was special tithing that you were expected to give like monthly. And she was basically, she'd get paid, she'd take her paycheck, cash it out, give the money to the church. She didn't keep any of it for herself. She was still living at home, so she obviously was still able to be supported by her parents, who were not a part of this church, by the way. I don't even know if her parents were religious. I don't think they were, but they expected her to give all of her money to, I don't even know if they expected her to give all of their money, but she felt like she had to give all of her money to the church.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine also because, I mean, the really disgusting thing here is, you know, if you're gonna hit up a bunch of rich moguls and trick them into giving you a couple $1 million, I'm not going to really cry. But you are a bunch of college students who are famously poor and don't have a lot of disposable income, especially if they're not living with their parents. I can't even imagine the people that got wrapped into this who didn't have a support network. It's kind of crazy evil that the cult chose to target these people for their tithing, you know, to give all this money when they probably barely have. I mean, most college students are making minimum wage or a little bit above it, and most college students have part-time jobs. Like they can't, because it's hard to keep a full-time job. I know college students who do it, you know, so back bless them, but like it's really hard to keep a full-time job as a college student if you're also a full-time college student. Of course, if you're a part-time college student, that's a different situation, but like it's really difficult. So these college students are probably giving their paychecks probably like a few $100 a week, and they're giving, and that's it. That'd be a good paycheck, and they're giving all of it to this church. Sucks.
And I don't know about the pastor for the church that I was a part of specifically, but from what I've read online, because I had never gone to his house, though I was invited once because they had like a barbecue at his house for the Super Bowl Sunday or something like that. But I would kind of looked at my boyfriend. I was like, I'm tired. I just want to go home. I don't want to go to this. And he was like, okay. I think he ended up going without me afterwards. But from what I've read, that most of the pastors of these churches have basically like McMansions. They are very wealthy.
Yeah, which is a classical theme, I think, in most mega churches.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, this wasn't a mega church.
Yeah,
You said it was a
small
community. Yeah. Did your boyfriend ever mention how big the house was when he went?
I don't remember.
Was this one of those big houses?
I think he just might have mentioned that it was a nice house, and I think he had like a pretty big TV to watch the game on. But I don't remember if he did describe it. I don't remember how big it was.
I find it interesting that you know, the usually the rich people you imagine are like, you know, they're the pastor of some mega church with like 10,000 members.
Yeah.
And those churches are definitely aggressive about giving money to them, but like. It sounds like for him to be well off with such a small congregation, he must have really been having to milk them dry.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Our church wasn't the only one. This was a nationwide thing, a huge organization. They were probably getting money from more than just the 35 people of that congregation.
So here's some interesting facts we can have about the Church of Christ. The largest church service that they've ever had was at the AT&T Center in San Antonio, Texas. This was in 2012, and they had 17,000 members in attendance. So they do have a lot of people with them. The largest church, or the largest congregation, is in LA, with 6,000 members. And it says that they are in 155 countries around the world.
Wow.
So they're pretty big. Interestingly enough, the Wikipedia does not outright name them as a cult. But it does say they are a very controversial organization. And this also says that they heavily target college students.
Yeah. I think they're very good at making themselves seem like they're just another church. You don't think they're a cult unless you actually are in it. And even the people that are actually in it, many of them don't think it's a cult.
Are there any details you'd like to mention about things you saw that hasn't been brought out in this interview that you think would be interesting?
Something I just remembered is they very heavily emphasized that you were supposed to put Jesus above everything. Even it was always Jesus first, then yourself, then your family, then your friends, and so on.
But your family, yourself is above your family?
I think so.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I remember during one of the Bible studies, one of the girls that was kind of there as the discussion helper was talking about how for her mother's birthday, it was on Sunday, and she wanted to go on a hike up at like this kind of popular hiking trail, but it was at the same time as the church service, and she said, I just had to remember that I needed to put Jesus first, and even though I love my mother, I love Jesus more, and I had to go to the church service instead of go hiking with my mom for her birthday, because her parents weren't religious, and she's basically cut herself off because from her parents because they weren't religious and they weren't willing to open themselves up to it. So they're very good at distancing you from any other support system you might have if they're not religious. And even if they are religious, they are very against other religions and even other Christians because they believe that their church is the one true church.
I think we mentioned it was very strange that they require you to get baptized even if you've already been baptized in another Christian denomination.
Yeah.
Which is unusual from what I understand.
Yeah, that is the one thing that made my boyfriend think it was a cult. He was like, it's weird because you don't need to be baptized to be a disciple of God. And I've already been baptized twice. He got baptized when he was very young, and then again when he was a teenager when he decided that he truly does believe in God. So that's what made him feel a little bit weird about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does sound a little bit weird. Where are you right now in relation to Christ and cults of all nature?
Cults in all nature can go suck a dick. In terms of religion, if you're religious, I have nothing against you, as long as you're not hurting anybody. I myself am not religious anymore. Atheist, although, praise our Lord Sobek, may he guide you with his scaly ways. And after I broke up with my boyfriend at the time, I went to a couple different churches, but I kind of realized that I think I was only doing it to make him happy, and that I didn't truly believe in God. I don't think I ever really did. So that's where I am at this point in my life.
Well, I think that this has been a wonderful interview. Are you worried at all about maybe us being attacked as a result of this interview? Do you think that maybe we should research if... From
what I know, they are very aware that people call them a cult. I don't know if they actively go out and attack people. I suspect there will be possibly... We're not that popular, but there will possibly be some comments saying, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's fine. I don't think... Most of the people in that church I don't think are truly hateful. I think they're maybe just lost and a little bit confused, and I think that's fine. Obviously, if they start attacking us, we'll delete those comments or ignore them. I don't think I'm going to be hurt by somebody saying that I'm a godless heathen, because that's true.
I might favorite them because they might just reinforce our point.
Yeah, that's fair. So I don't know what the reaction to this will be. I thought it would be an interesting story to tell, and I just kind of wanted to spread the word. I feel like there are many religions that people think are kind of culty, but I think this is one that is, despite it being so large, I think people don't see it that often as a cult, and I just kind of wanted to spread that awareness.
Great. And to be fair, I think we should have a disclaimer that you only had experience with one branch. I mean, it could vary. It could be worse in some locations, better in some.
That is very true.
Who knows? But from your experience, that's what we know.
I will put some more resources in the description below. I am just one story. I did not get the worst of it. There are many people out there. I'll post a link to the Bible study notes so that you guys can see just how strange they are. I don't think they're typical for Bible study notes, and I'll post some other resources.
If you could speak to any of the people still in this organization, some of the people who are not yet completely lost, what would you say to them now if you could talk to them?
Even if you are truly religious, take a look, go to another church service, take a look at how they do things, and just try to dissect what they are doing that is so manipulative and how controlling they are. They shouldn't take up every hour of your time. They shouldn't be taking all of your money. They shouldn't be cutting you off from your friends and family. They should be there to support you and help build you up. And that is not what they are doing. They are trying to break you down piece by piece so that you're nothing but a shell that they can manipulate.